Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham, your Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me, Mr. Sean Cunningham from Fox 40. Sean, what's going on?
James, Brenden, good. I've got the bassy voice, the dulcet bassy tones today.
Oh, there he goes. I think he screamed too much at
At Bottle Rock.
At Battle Rock this weekend. And of course,
sorry, go ahead. Yes,
yeah,
Brenden,
of course.
Brenden and Molly.
We have Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast and, of course, the Kings Herald, and Molly, who is, people want her to be the mascot of the Kings Beat podcast. To be honest with you, that's fine with me because my dogs, they hide out during this, and they also make way too much noise. There is Molly, the beautiful, lovely Molly.
Yes.
We still have our pug still has the cone of shame on, because he had to have some lip surgery. He had a little cancer spot on his lip. And then they cut him all up. They took some teeth out. They saw something on his eye they didn't like, so they took it out.
Oh, my God, man.
Yeah,
Jeez.
$1,900 later, we get our pug back with a cone.
I hope Molly can't hear that, because cone of shame is
No. She dealt with the cone when got her spayed, and she did not enjoy it.
Yeah, the pug seems content with it, plus he's got, muffin top. So you can actually shove the cone, in its regular form, over the top of his little fat head, and then it gets hung up on his rolls, and you're okay. And then you can slowly pull. You don't have to disconnect it, which is the worst. All right.
I don't like the fat shaming of this dog.
He's a chubby bunny. I think he weighs 28 pounds. So. Yeah, he's a good sized pug. He's very happy and chubby. All right, so let's get to Kings chatter. First up, if you're watching on YouTube, go down below and hit the thumbs up. We forgot to do this last time, and of course, subscribe. We're blowing up. We're getting it's super fun to watch all the views that we're getting on both YouTube, and the audio is doing really well as well. So thank you to everybody who's jumping on board the Kings Beat. On that note, if you're not a premium subscriber to the Kings Beat, make sure you do that as well. We will have another happy hour now that we're in June. We'll get another stellar guest. Last month was spectacular with Gary Gerald. Some really amazing moments in that. And if you missed it, it's because you don't have a premium subscription to the Kings Beat.
Simple as that. Simple as that,
yeah. What's going on, guys? How are you? Let's start there.
I'm doing fine if my voice recovers. It's been busy with coming off of Bottle Rock and then getting ready for these NBA finals in San Francisco, and it's always interesting to go down there because it seems like the NBA is kind of back to normal-ish as much as they can, and they're navigating a lot of landmines down there, and we're all masked up again, and but it's a fun time down there, and I think. I've always told you guys walking into a setting like the NBA Finals or Summer League or an All-Star game where there's a lot of national media or people that you've seen for the past 20 years of covering the league, and inevitably because I've just been around the same team for so long in the Sacramento Kings that they look at me and they go, what are the Kings doing? They're just always. It feels like I'm the one getting poked, and I just go, totally, man. I don't know. And so right now comes at an interesting time where they've got some off-season news. Seems like everyone really likes the Mike Brown hire for the most part. And everyone's like, what are they going to do with 4? What are they going to do at number 4 with the draft? So even at the NBA Finals, James and Brenden, this team makes people kind of scratch their head, and there's a bewilderment of curiosity around them.
How many finals have you covered now, Sean?
Every one of the Warriors. So every one that the Warriors have been in. So that's what, 6?
That's
5?
6, yeah.
6,
I think I covered
6 of the last 8, I think.
4. I believe I covered 4 of them. Yeah.
I'd imagine there's an energy just being around it. Even yesterday, I don't know if you're at media yesterday or what today looks like. How different does it feel to just be covering the finals?
Yeah, no, it does feel different because you inevitably want to compare it to previous seasons, and you go, oh, we used to do this, and now we're doing that. And as an example, you used to be able to surround the outline of the court to get your shots and your B-roll and your pictures, and then afterwards, all but about maybe 4 members of the team and the head coach would end. So the the 4 stars of the team, head coach would go off and do like a interview room. And then everybody else goes to a podium where everyone kind of groups around them. Might be a scrum, might be able to pull a guy around for a one-on-one. And it seemed like each team had about 7 or 8 members go to the interview room, and everybody else go to a podium. And that makes it a little bit tougher to talk to some people. So it was okay for me because I found some of the local angles, which not only include Nemanja Bjelica, former Sacramento King with the Warriors now, even Nick Stauskas, former Kings draft pick, who is now had a hell of a year, really, in a very interesting journey to not only the Celtics in his first NBA postseason, but his first NBA Finals experience, and it's 8 seasons removed now from Sacramento, which sounds crazy to think about when you think about it. And then you know even some smaller things where it's like, oh look, Damon Stoudemire on Ime Udoka on his staff, Ime, a former King from the 09-10 season, and then there's Damon Stoudemire who was spent the last 5 years as the head coach of Pacific Basketball in Stockton, and this is his first year with the Celtics. So there's just so many little storylines that always kind of intertwine back to the Northern California region, and then it's funny just to look over there and, hey, look, it's Will Hardy, and he interviewed for the Kings job, and I'm kind of putting an eye on him and the camera on him and his interactions with players and Ime Udoka, and I go, huh. It makes you just go, huh, wonder what that might have been like.
What could have been.
Yeah.
Interesting. I love going down to the finals, but to be honest, it's just such a drive, and I just don't feel it this year. I don't know. If the Warriors continue this trend, maybe I'll go back next year. It's not the easiest thing to get credentialed for, but I'm sure my friends at ESPN 1320 could help out there. What did you take away from Nemanja Bjelica, who I'm going to, as Tuesday overreactions, I'm going to call him, even though it's Thursday, right? I'm going to call him the X Factor in the NBA Finals. Nemanja Bjelica, the X Factor.
I like it.
Yeah.
Facts.
What do you think?
Well, I in talking to him, I thought it was kind of cool because, I think after his Kings run in that trade, I think he was looking at being on the downside of his career, as he really is. But I think he was thinking of, okay, well, that's it. I'm probably going back to Europe. He's always admired the Warriors, and to have the opportunity pop up with them, it was one that I think he was a little surprised by and incredibly grateful for. So he had kind of talked about just how much of a dream it is for him to play in the NBA Finals. And I thought it was interesting because here he comes from Europe. And I know the NBA is still a lot of people's dream, but most of them really want to represent their country. Most Europeans come in and want to represent their country in Olympics and FIBA, and that sometimes takes a little bit of the precedence over even the NBA. It's like, oh, even making the NBA would be great, but for him it was like, no, NBA Finals are to play in that stage, and he's such a basketball junkie. Having the opportunity to do so with a really class organization like Golden State is something that's not lost on him. So he's really enjoying the moment. I think he really was appreciative of having a really big moment in the final game of that Western Conference Finals, hitting a pretty big shot, and knowing that he just has to stay ready. And he doesn't control his minutes, but there could be opportunity for him in this NBA Finals, and he's really delighted and enjoying himself for sure.
Yeah, I'd like to see him, go back to Europe where he was an MVP and actually have a couple more good seasons, And people who don't, Nemanja's a really good dude. He's actually a lot funnier. He's like deadpan funny.
Yeah.
And you could always catch him at Starbucks, like doing his little espresso shots, like boom, boom. He's very, very European, but a very good dude.
Wasn't there some, maybe bad blood is too harsh of wording, but people that didn't feel great about Bjelica, something about checking into a game? Don't the 1320 guys hold on to this a little bit? I don't remember this situation.
Yeah, I think he did. There was a point where he decided not to play. But to be honest with you, that last season, he lost his starting job, even though he had outplayed Marvin Bagley every time they played. So there was some bitterness with him with just the fact that he had put in the work and he had done everything to be a good NBA player. And, he thought that he lost his job to somebody who didn't deserve it. Not that, Marvin didn't, but Marvin hadn't beat him out. That's what I mean by that. And so there was a little bit of bad blood there where he kind of felt like, he was pushed to the side prematurely. And to be honest with you, the Kings probably would have been a better team if he played. But, you're in that situation where you have to see what you have with Marvin. And so it's a no-win situation for a coach. It's a no-win for front office and for the players involved. So, yeah, I would assume that he had some trepidation about like what happened there. But overall, when I look at players, you have to understand some of that stuff. Like if he was like a major distraction all the time, then there would have been more of an issue. But, of course, he wasn't a major distraction. There was just, I think, one incident where he was like, yeah, I'd prefer not to go in a game when you guys have left me out here in the cold for so long.
Well, and it was also a little bit more than that, too, because organizationally they had discussions and actions had kind of flown in the face of. So it trickled over to the basketball floor, which was not good. It is bigger than that moment. Like it wasn't just as simple as I'm not going in. But it was also a disagreement with Luke. It's just it was a bad situation all around. I don't think Belly regrets it necessarily, but I don't think he necessarily. I think it probably bothers him that he's the poster child of somebody not wanting to enter the game. Him and then ironically Marvin himself as well. It wasn't a good look and it wasn't a good situation. I think it could have been handled a lot better organizationally, but at the end of the day, you just have to be straight up and honest with players.
Yeah, he's not the first player to have an issue, and certainly not the first player in Sacramento. I remember Omri Caspi had a very similar situation with Dave Yeager, where they couldn't get on the same page at all, and it felt like they didn't want to get on the same page, and it just kept getting uglier and uglier, and behind the scenes, and so these things do happen. Guys want to play, and I don't blame them for wanting to play. Every time that you don't play, it hurts your career. It hurts the amount of money that you can make in the next stop. And, I don't think really Omri had much of a career after he left here. Just like I don't think Bjelica will have like an extended look here. I don't see him playing like another 3 or 4 years. Just because, he's an older player at this point. He came over from Europe pretty late. Outside of that, Brenden, what do you like? We talked about like our, you predicted Celtics in 6, but what are you looking forward to with the finals?
Yeah, I think I said 7 for what it's worth, but
maybe it was 7. Yeah,
I hope you're right. I really do, because I would love nothing more than just an amazing finals. I just don't think we're going to get it.
I hope it's close. It's going to be all about Golden State's offense and Boston's defense. I think the other side of the floor will be interesting as well, but like that's what I'm really intrigued to watch. What was the latter part of your question, James?
I don't know, just like that's what you're looking forward to? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm curious to see really Klay is the interesting one to me. Like, what version of Klay Thompson are we going to get out there? How well is he going to move defensively? I think I mentioned this on the last episode, but like if you're asking him to cover Jaylen Brown, that's a phenomenal test of how well are you moving at this point when he's not all too far removed from, 2 years of not playing basketball. So it'll be interesting to see where he's at, and he's been pretty streaky on the offensive end, so I'm curious to see what sort of Klay shows up on a night-to-night basis. And Jordan Poole is a little bit of an X factor to me too, where I don't know if you're going to get a poor decision-making Jordan Poole for a majority of the games, or if you're going to get 15 points a night with one of those being a 30-point game randomly throughout this series. And like I said, I think Golden State offense versus Boston's defense is the most intriguing to me. Obviously, there's Defensive Player of the Year versus the best shooter of all time and one of the best offense players we've ever seen. But I think that with how much switching Boston does and not having a weak point on their defense, there's in their 7-8 man rotation, there's not a single one that you look at and are like, this is a bad defender that we attack. Like Derek White was the closest thing that you saw for Miami, but that was really a size mismatch with Butler. And I think Derek White is still a good defender. So I think it'd be interesting to see how the switching goes and if they can communicate well enough to deal with all the off-ball movement that Golden State deploys.
You sticking with your Warriors in 5?
I am. I hope I'm wrong though. I'm not rooting to be right. I feel like I see where Brennan's going, and I like it. But I mean, this is a Celtics team that has gone up against. I mean, you look at their path. I mean, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Miami. That's some pretty solid defense, and Golden State right there among them. I mean, we're looking at what they've been able to do against, the likes of Memphis and Denver before that, and then just recently with Dallas. And Andrew Wiggins has been sensational. And the other thing has been interesting is just you mentioned Clay. Clay was really good defensively in this Dallas series. I thought he had some moments. I mean, they're just a really good defensive team with Draymond and the way Wiggins has played, and really Otto Porter has been such a really big lift for them when he's on the floor. I think I mentioned this before. I'm not a plus minus guy, but his leaps off the page. When he's on the floor, it's a huge plus, and when he's not there, there's a big negative. So there are things that I've liked about it from Golden State's defense, but you're looking at a Celtics team that is just so crazily inconsistent. They can't. I mean, I know they're going up against a solid Miami team, but I think I pointed out to you, James, 2 games where you're in the 80s. If that's what you're doing, you're toast. And I know Marcus Smart is putting everything on him, where he's saying they feel like they're the underdogs, although I think the national media actually has given a lot of credence to what Boston is doing and has them kind of as a favorite for the most part, at least from what I've seen. But I just don't see it. I still don't think we've seen the best that the Warriors are capable of doing, even in a single game. And maybe we see it in game 1. I just can't see Golden State losing this series. I really don't, because even when they're bad, they've found ways to close out games. They've got a lot of guys who haven't been this far. There's really nobody who's been this far for Boston. That can be a blessing or a curse. But I just think that this Warriors team and this organization is a dynasty for a reason, and I think they're really clicking right now. And it's just, barring some sort of injury, losing a Draymond Green or a Steph Curry, I think those are the 2 that are the most important for what they do. I just cannot see them losing this series, and I think they're going to do it in a pretty dominating way. I hope I'm wrong, because I really want a really good series, man. I do.
I think that there's going to be a moment where Steph and Clay, they turn back the clock, and they'll remind everybody who they are and why they're there again for the 6th time in 8 years. I mean, when those guys are on, they're some of the most dominant players we've ever seen in the game. And, I think Sacramento saw it firsthand when Klay Thompson scored, 37 in 1 quarter. When they start clicking, it's just get out of the way. And what they do to teams in the 3rd quarter is just stunning. It always has been, but still, you can't game plan for what they do in the 3rd quarter, because it doesn't matter what you try to do. They seem to run people over. They can go down in the half by 15 and come out of the 3rd up 12. I mean, it's just the way they're built. And so really an interesting, I think it should be an interesting series, but I too think, I said 6. I really believe it'll be closer to 5. But I think 6 is where, that's kind of the spot. It's game 5 would be at home in San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
The other interesting aspect for me is I think Boston did really well in the open court and does a good job of forcing turnovers. And I think Golden State, that's been one of their flaws throughout kind of this run that they've had. And then when it gets into a half court, there are aspects where, I think Boston tends to isolate a little bit too much sometimes. It's almost a little bit of carryover of kind of what they did with Stevens still at times, but I think that it's important and needed at times in playoff basketball, and I think there's guys to attack a little bit on Golden State's side. I sound like I'm very much believing in Boston here, and I am, but I feel like I'm more so defending the fact that they have a chance in my mind, more so than thinking they should be crazily favored here or anything.
I feel like we should point out, too, they split during the regular season, but that second game where they held Golden State to 88, that was the game that Steph got hurt famously against Marcus Smart. He only played 13 minutes, so I don't know what you can really take from either game. Klay Thompson I don't think was available in the first game, so this is going to be interesting. I just think I don't know. They've also been really well rested, and Iguodala, they might have him back. He's questionable now, so it could be kind of a fun series, but I just think it's going to be a pretty dominating one-way thing. I hope I'm wrong.
Were either or both of you guys at that Clay game, the 37 and a quarter? It was in it was in Golden State actually, huh?
It was. That came against the Kings, and unfortunately, I drew the short straw and stayed back in Sacramento for that game, and I was so pissed when I saw that because I was there for the. Remember, James was there for this one, I believe, too, when Omri Caspi and Steph Curry, or maybe it was Clay. I think it was Curry, though. But they just went off in that third. Or it was a third or was it a second? Second quarter.
Like Omri had 19 and Steph had 17. Yeah, something like that. It was like dueling banjos. It was absolutely crazy.
But 37 by Clay, I mean, I was watching that on TV and just like, why am I not there? That's insane.
I'm pretty sure I was there. You know, they all run in together. And I know that sounds crazy that you could be at a game where something miraculous happened and not be sure if you were there. But, you know, when you've covered as many games as we have, they do they do run in together pretty well.
I remember being there when Kevin Martin got traded. that was interesting.
Okay. Yeah. And then we talked about this before during the Mark Jackson stuff. Like, that happened in Sacramento when they traded Monte Ellis, like, in pregame for Andrew Bogut. So, yeah. And, hey, while we wrap up the finals chatter, I want to give a shout-out to our guy, Marc Spears. He had some health issues, and he thinks Apple Watch came to his rescue. And it's good to hear the big man is doing all right. He's going to be at the finals, but he had a little health scare. So big shout out to our friend Marc Spears. He's a genuine dude. One of my favorites ever.
James, I talked to him yesterday, and I think everyone saw his tweet. So he's crediting Apple and his Apple Watch and all that thing, and that's legit. But it detected an irregular heartbeat. Like, his heart rate was going up. He went in, saw his doctor. They're like, no, we need to get you to the emergency room. Goes to the emergency room, has to do one of the thing he told me about it, like going through his leg, getting the artery in the leg, doing this electrical shock thing, and to fix the irregular heartbeat that's at the top of his heart. And, like, I'm looking at him like in amazement. He's like, no, that's why you have this. That's why you do this stuff. Like, that's why, you know, awareness is great, but having the Apple Watch to be able to monitor stuff like that is so important. And I'm like, I mean, he made a believer out of me. I don't have an Apple Watch. I do have an iPhone. I think I'm gonna probably, there you go.
Sean, you always got the G-Shock on, huh?
I sometimes, or I've got a couple Nixon watches, and I was a watch person for a long time, and I stopped. I only kind of wear one or two or three, but I might have to go do that, man. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I don't know all of. I text back and forth with Mark a little bit. I don't know all the specifics. I mean, they went up through his femoral artery in his leg. That's what they do when they go up and they check those things out. And but that's crazy. And look, I've talked about this a bunch of times. This is a hard lifestyle. Like, people think that we just have like a great time all the time, but it's a lot of sitting. It's a lot of sedentary life. It's go. It's a lot of late nights. It's a lot of long hours. It's a lot of bad eating habits, which, you go to a game and they supply you with an unlimited supply of soda and popcorn and cookies, and they feed you, and it's not always the healthiest dinner. You get out at midnight, you got an hour drive home, you stop at Taco Bell. This is something that I talk to young reporters about all the time. I remember I talked to Logan Murdoch about it, and then he came back to me a year later, and he's like, dude, I have gained so much weight. You were totally right. I realized that as soon as I started doing it, that I was like, you can't catch your breath, you can't keep up, and you're just struggling to survive and shoving whatever you can in your mouth and not doing your exercising and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, you end up gaining a bunch of weight. And it really, if you look at beat writers around the league, there's a very unhealthy lifestyle that most of us live. And so you gotta watch yourself. And so I'm glad Mark's okay. And I'm glad the Apple Watch helped him out. And, I don't know exactly what the reasons are, but so many things going around right now, especially post-COVID stuff, which is AFib going on with so many people I know. It's just wild, all the side effects that we're going to be dealing with for a while. So again, big shout out to Marc Spears. Let's get into Kings talk. And I feel like over the last couple of episodes, this has become like the Jaden Ivey podcast, and I don't want it to be that way. But at the same time,
when they jumped to 4, the conversation was Jaden Ivey. Like, he is the conversation.
Yeah, and I feel like we're trapped in this cycle of what do you do, what do you do, what do you do? Like, how do we deal with the Jaden Ivey situation specifically? Because, I think the topic of discussion today is if the draft goes in order, and it goes as according to Hoyle, right? So we've got whether it's Smith or Holmgren going number 1, number 2, Banchero going number 3. The Kings are on the clock at number 4. Should we be concerned about the fit? And I know that this is something that like we've discussed a little bit, but I think that there's enough issue here with the Sacramento Kings that they've seen that De'Aaron Fox and another ball dominant type player can't really work together. Like, I think pie in the sky, everyone would be like, hey, trade the number 4 pick and Harrison Barnes and go get Donovan Mitchell. But then you have this issue. Would Donovan Mitchell and De'Aaron Fox fit together? And then we start hearing sort of the player comps of Ivey, and it's Mitchell, it's Russell Westbrook. Like, what do we think about this? If the Kings are on the clock at 4, is there a huge issue about selecting Ivey because of the fit with De'Aaron Fox? De'Aaron Fox is 24 years old. He's under contract for 4 more years. Like, this could become an issue, but I don't. Where are we at?
Well, for me, I mean, it's, as someone who's been pretty vocal about exploring trade possibilities, if you're looking at number 4, you're strictly doing it to get better. And I think, again, it's all about best player available at that point. I think you figure it out. And look, this flies in the face of my wanting to trade or explore trade possibilities. Again, I don't know what you're getting, but I'd want to explore every one of them. That being said, look at just who's in the finals right now. I mean, you've got 2 teams with a lot of homegrown talent, especially with the Warriors, who formed a dynasty. Their addition was essentially Andre Iguodala. For the Celtics, their addition was essentially Al Horford. Everyone else comes right up through the draft, comes right up, they develop, and they've been around there for a little while. So that's why I think you see so many national folks say you need to build through the draft. That's the only way to do it, especially if you're a small market team. And they're not wrong. But if you're more concerned about what's around you right now, then that's, in my opinion, why you possibly move the pick. And that's why I've talked about, you brought in a talent like Domantas Sabonis. You are now in I don't want to say win now, but you're not really, you hope to be able to develop and win at the same time. But you don't make that move if you're not trying to ultimately compete right now. And so in doing so, you've got to be very, very aggressive to follow that map. You can't necessarily put Domantas Sabonis, I mean, you could, but you put Domantas Sabonis and then you put it at 4 like Jaden Ivey, who I do think can contribute right away, and then you just try to figure it out. I think that's fine. I would prefer seeing somebody try to move it. You mentioned Donovan Mitchell. Bringing in Donovan Mitchell, if that were possible, well, hell yeah, you should sign up for that right now. Because at best case scenario, maybe Jaden Ivey is Donovan Mitchell, right? So if it takes you to get what he already is and it accelerates it, okay, great, do it. And then if you're seeing what about the fit with De'Aaron Fox, well, you figure that out. And then all of a sudden your calculus with your team changes immensely. So no matter which way you do it, I think you still have to go with, if you're drafting best player available, you stick to that. I mean, you just have to do that. You can't be worried or concerned about fit, because every time you are, that's when it goes back and bites you.
Brenden?
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of a tiered system where if you think that, for example, Jabari Smith Jr. is a better fit than Chet Holmgren, and neither one are like supremely more talented than the other, so you prefer Jabari because of the fit, then sure. But if you're talking about going down a tier in talent for the sake of fit, is where I get lost. And if those top 3 are gone, as we're expecting, like Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, and Paulo Banchero, I think Jaden Ivey's left in a tier of his own when it comes to talent. And so I don't see there's any way that I would, I was the one making the decision, that I could comfortably like justify reaching lower. Think of like, I know it's the name who shall not be said, I guess, but like Luka Doncic, talk was like, I don't want to take the ball out of Fox's hands. Like, they had to go get more ball handlers to surround Luka. They had to get a Jalen Brunson, who I understand is good playing off ball, but Spencer Dinwiddie is another ball handler that functioned well with Luka. Like, think of John Wall did fine with a Bradley Beal. Like, a Zach LaVine is playing well with Alonzo Ball. Like, you need more than one playmaker on your franchise. I think that is so important in today's NBA. I don't think that Fox and Ivey would be a great fit. I think they can work just fine, though. I mean, what it comes down to, I think the basics of it is the shooting. That, I mean, if you're betting on, if you're taking that, they just all have to, and this is Sabonis included, hit like a good outcome when it comes to what level of three-point shooter they're going to be. They have to be somewhere in the upper percentile of possible outcomes with shooting, because I think they're all, specifically Fox and Ivey, are capable three-point shooters. They just need to be more consistent in that way. I mean, Fox shot 35% off the catch last year. Like, it's not bad. Ivey made progress as a three-point shooter last year and was a little bit streaky, but he doesn't lack confidence in any sort of way. And I think you guys made a good point when we talked about it previously, that when it comes to like the fit being wonky as it was with Tyrese and Fox, with Tyrese Halliburton and De'Aaron Fox, is that like Ivey doesn't need the ball in the same way that Tyrese did to be effective with Tyrese's playmaking. Like, Ivey's cutting and off-ball movement is extremely effective. I mean, there's zero issues in the open court. I think you'd have a phenomenal transition offense, but it's just half-court spacing. And realistically, like, Fox can't be your only playmaker. And even Sabonis, like, you need another one. So I think that, sure, there would be growing pains, but there already were with Fox and Sabonis. I think Fox like got a taste of playing a little bit more off ball and an opportunity to grow in that aspect. I think there was still progress to be made. I still think that pairing would have worked fine. And maybe it's just an aspect of Fox needs to get a little bit more comfortable playing off the ball. But I also think the hierarchy would be a lot more obvious than it was with Tyrese. Like, De'Aaron and Sabonis are the 1 and 2, and if one of them aren't out there, then you can feature Ivey a little bit more. But for the most part, I think those roles being a little bit more defined is important. Like, we heard a lot of Tatum and Brown not being able to coexist because both those guys need the ball and they're better shooters. But it came down to creating a hierarchy where, okay, Tatum is the number 1 and Brown's the number 2, and establishing that. So I don't think it's a perfect fit, but I think the talent is so just a tier above everybody else when it comes to Ivey at 4 that you can't overlook it, and the fit isn't bad enough that I'm like terribly concerned or anything like that. You just take talent and figure it out.
I agree, and like I've talked about this a million times about how while I understand the trade and I agree with the trade to deal Halliburton for Sabonis, I still believe that if you had given them more time, eventually they would have figured things out. And to be honest, it comes down to, I don't think it comes down to Halliburton figuring things out. Halliburton's like usage rate was under 20. Like, even though he was this incredible assist guy, it was like very effective, very quick, and not a bunch of dribbling, and boom, play, score the basket, make your teammates better, move to the other end, right?
It's the way basketball should be played.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, but the modern basketball game, they're like half the teams in the league have a dominant player like De'Aaron Fox, who has the ball in their hand a ton, and basically orchestrates the offense, but not really the offense for others. Sometimes it's for others, but for the most part, De'Aaron, averaging around 6 assists a game last year, that just wasn't enough, right? He needed to be up around 8, 9, 10, and the reason why he wasn't partially was because Halliburton was on the team for, a good portion of the year and took on a lot of the assist load. But then we saw, once Halliburton was gone, we saw Fox's assist numbers start to jump. I get to this point where, again, Fox is 24, and it kind of brings us to the next question. At what point do you stop worrying whether a player can fit next to De'Aaron Fox or not. Because I know he's under contract for 4 years, but like, you haven't won. Like, the best they've done with De'Aaron Fox on their team is 39 wins with Dave Yeager the 1 year. But like, this team hasn't won, and I'm not putting that on Fox. Like, the instability of this franchise is nuts. The fact that he's playing for his 4th head coach in 6 seasons, that's absolutely crazy, and that's not conducive to winning or to growing as a player. But I still have to ask the question, like, you passed on Luka because of De'Aaron Fox, and you thought the fit would be bad. Can you pass on another guy who people are literally comparing to Russell Westbrook and Donovan Mitchell? If he's even in the ballpark of those guys, you're looking at a multi-time All-Star. You can't pass up that player because of Fox, and that's not. I'm not trying to attack Fox. What I'm saying is, like, at some point, like, man, you got to figure out how to succeed with others. And you guys brought up Boston, and what I see with Boston a lot of the time is at the 6-minute mark in the first, Jaylen Brown comes out, Tatum takes over. They start the second quarter with Brown. He takes over for 6 minutes while Tatum sits, and then they finish the final 6 minutes together of the quarter. So they're both playing, 36 minutes a night, but they're having at least 6 minutes in each half of just them on the court where it's their show and they get to take advantage and do all the things. I think when it comes to a guy like Ivey, that's 2 years from now, 2-3 years from now, where you have to start worrying about things like that. But I'm certainly not going to make a decision right now when I'm looking at the future of the team and I'm thinking, okay, I can't do this now because of Fox. To me, that's crazy talk. If you've got talent, draft talent.
Absolutely, draft talent. And that's kind of what I meant a minute ago when I said, you draft the best player available and it possibly changes the calculus. Like, your 2 years from now could look dramatically different. Maybe you're moving off of Fox. Maybe you're moving off of Fox a year from now. Maybe it works. It's the GM and the front office's job is to, gather talent for a head coach to execute the plan. And the one analytic I love to always point out, for all the analytics, there's never one for chemistry. And, I think they thought, seeing what Tyrese Halliburton was able to bring to a basketball team, that it would work right away. And for the most part, it probably would have long term. And, maybe you stick with someone like Halliburton over Fox. But the reality was they couldn't get the type of player they wanted with De'Aaron Fox, and they had to part ways with Halliburton. So those are just the breaks. Sometimes those are hard decisions you have to make, and they're, operating in a way where they didn't give up their best assets, which was their draft picks. So you still have Fox, and I think they really, really still truly love De'Aaron Fox and what he can bring, especially the small sample size of him pairing next to a big man like Domantas Sabonis, who's an absolute beautiful playmaker. Beyond that, you still have to acquire talent, and it's shooting, and it's defense, 3-and-D, all these things. So if Jaden Ivey, though, ends up being that best player in your calculus when you're putting your draft board together, you shouldn't waver from that. And I do think, James, you're right about the 2 to 3 years with Jaden Ivey, but I also feel like Jaden Ivey is one of those players in this draft that I identified at least as a guy who can contribute right away. I think he would be an impact player for the Sacramento Kings in his rookie season.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that an organization would feel so much need to complement or optimize De'Aaron Fox is because he's the supreme talent on the team. You need to get the most out of him. And now Domantas Sabonis falls into that same aspect. But it's because who else are you going to worry about building around? And maybe you have a chance at number 4 to get another guy where that's a good problem to have. If he's good enough that you have to worry about building around him, then that's a fine problem to take on. In the end, they need more talent, and the reason that Fox has been such a focal point is because he's been obviously the best talent on the roster. So if you have an opportunity to get another guy that maybe can rival that talent level, I just don't see it. It comes back to Kings only have so many opportunities to get a star. And if you think Jaden Ivey has a chance of being a star, then you do it and figure it out. Offensively, I think that the fit makes sense. Ivey's used to playing off the ball. I know like a majority of possessions, he was a pick and roll ball handler. I think he can figure it out, and they can figure it out together. The same way I thought that Fox and Tyrese would have figured it out, as you guys said. I think defensively is like where the question is. We saw Fox and Tyrese, like both of those guys together defensively led to some really poor perimeter defense. I would guess there were other aspects too. Like I think there were some motivation questions on the defensive end last year with Buddy and Bagley and things like this, and everybody just kind of being locked in full effort on that end. But I don't think that Ivey's been very impressive on the defensive end. He's had his moments, but I think that he's fairly similar to De'Aaron Fox on that end. And Domantas Sabonis is better than I expected, but he's still probably an average defender in playing your most important defensive position at the 5, I would assume. So maybe there's concerns on defense too. But again, I still, no matter that, I come back to like you only have so many opportunities to get a star when you're the Sacramento Kings, and Ivey has a chance of being that. So that's the conversation to me.
I'm with you. Like, you just can't make the decision because of Fox. At the end of the day, like, if you don't make that decision, what are you saying about Fox? Like, how many players you have to go through that don't work with him before you find someone that might work with him? I mean, we saw a pure shooter.
Nobody should be considered when you're in the top 5 of the draft, to be honest.
I agree. I agree completely. But, I mean, again, you put Buddy Hield, an elite three-point shooter, next to him, you didn't win more than 39 games. You've tried you didn't really try Donte DiVincenzo next to him, but you've tried Halliburton next to him. That didn't really work, and that's like a toolsy guy. It's a guy who can shoot the ball at a high clip, but realistically, he's more of a true distributor than anything else. And so, like, look, I hope that they figure it out, but, you know, we go back to Donovan Mitchell, like, they put Mike Conley next to him. You know, at a certain point, you put a veteran point guard next to him and said, okay, you play with him, learn how to play with him. And they put up 50-plus wins every year, you know. So I think the Kings need to figure it out, and they need to stop worrying about things like potential fit when, you know, like, it's not like you're a 35-win team. You're a 30-win team. You're hoping to take a jump to 40-something wins next season and hopefully get yourself in some sort of playoff contention. That's not happening if you cut corners, and it's certainly not going to be a long-term situation if you continue to cut corners like this. So
I'm scared of Keegan Murray at 4 because to me, like, there's a lot of smoke around Keegan Murray at 5. So I think if there's an idea of like, oh, well, there is this guy that's going to be ready quicker, he fills the holes we need, and trading down isn't all that much of an option because he could be gone as quick as number 5. Like, if they go with Keegan Murray over Jaden Ivey, it's gonna. Yeah.
That's gamesmanship. That's gamesmanship right there. Okay, so
I guess
it's
also a guy who's a little bit older too, and I think that's what also makes some think that he can step in right away. I mean, if you look at the draft board, James, of your top 15 players, how many of them are step in right away impact players that you project? I mean, there's probably 5, maybe 6.
Maybe.
Depending upon what team, but I think specifically to the Kings, there's probably just 5 or 6. So
I don't even know if there's that, man.
He's one of them, though.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, you're probably looking at the top 4 and then Keegan Murray. But that shouldn't, again, that's fool's gold. That's such short-sighted vision.
It is.
You can't make a decision at number 4 like you did at number 9 last year. At number 9, that's okay to make a decision based on the maturity of the player and his ability to play right away. At number 4, if that's the decision you're making, then you shouldn't be in charge of a team. Like, if that's why you're doing it.
I also think...
Does it come back around to the front office's contract situation? You know, only
maybe,
one
but
year
again,
left.
that's then let's put it on where it belongs. Then that's on ownership. If you allow a GM to make a decision based on his contract situation, then number 1, you got the wrong guy. But number 2, you've put that guy in a situation to make a move that he shouldn't be making. You've put him in a situation to do a short-sighted move. And so that goes back to ownership, and what we always come back to with this franchise. So let's take it a little bit different path though. If you don't feel comfortable at number 4, if the Kings decide that they just can't do it, they can't draft Jaden Ivey, is there even a potential trade back that you guys feel comfortable with? Because we're talking, I don't think you want to trade out. You still want to put yourself in a position that, again, if Keegan Murray is available at 7, if Keegan Murray is available at 6, or at 8, where you would still have the possibility of getting him, is there a deal to the Pistons or the Pacers or the Blazers, or San Antonio, New Orleans, Washington, that group of 6, 5 through 10? Is there someone that you would want that would make you feel comfortable moving back?
For me, AJ Griffin. I mean, I don't know how far back you'd have to go, but the trade scenario that's a scenario where if you're looking at targeting somebody like him anywhere from 7 to 14, that could be intriguing. So pick your team, pick your player, pick your poison, and see what you can hash out. That could be an interesting scenario. I think we talked about it the last podcast, James, but I don't really look at it in terms of you have to go out and target your players. So it's not necessarily the teams, and it will come to the teams, but you can work out 3-way deals. You can get really creative, and I think they've had an idea of what the landscape looks like since February. I think it's changed for sure because things change by the week in the NBA, but I feel like you just identify your player first and who that is. For me, I just don't know. I mean, there's certainly players we talked about, big Brandon Ingram fan, probably not available. Things of that nature. It's Donovan Mitchell, big fan of Donovan Mitchell. I'd love to see him in a Kings uniform. I don't know that he's available, but that's how you kind of figure it out. And if you're looking at trying to identify by team by saying, okay, yeah, you got the Pelicans, you got the Spurs, you got the Wizards, you got the Knicks, all the way to 11, even OKC at 12, that is tougher to do because none of those, unless you truly love a player there. So maybe you're moving back, you're trying to acquire more assets, and then you can try to flip. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you have to go out and get the player you want. So if you've already looked at your team and said, this is what we need, do that. But in terms of falling back later in the draft, the only thing that I can really forecast is knowing that, well, if I do move back in the draft, there are a handful of players that I'd be comfortable taking from that 7 to 14 or even lower range, and you can figure that part out. Maybe you're just trading out of it completely and trying to grab, again, that veteran piece or something that's more to help you now. I just don't know what that is yet. I mean, you get a lot of smoke around Jeremy Grant, OG Anunoby, even a Pascal Siakam, stuff like that. I just don't think that some of those are more realistic. So until you really see what it is, or if you can have conversations regarding the player you want, you're kind of pissing in the wind a bit.
No, I got you. I mean, but if you look at number 6 and you're looking at the Pacers, would you go from 4 to 6 for Malcolm Brogdon?
No, I wouldn't.
See,
I'd rather. It really depends on their evaluation of Ivey, right?
I'd rather have Jaden Ivey personally.
I would too.
Okay, but I mean, at that point, you're looking at, Malcolm Brogdon and AJ Griffin and Keegan Murray. Right. So it's not just one. I mean, you're moving back, you're swapping out.
Right.
You're not giving up the number 4 pick for Malcolm Brogdon. So I just think it's there's a lot of intrigue, right? There's a lot of things that can happen between now and June 23rd, but also now and July 4th or 5th as we get to this. If you draft Jaden Ivey, what does that mean for Donte DiVincenzo?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I thought of Davion Mitchell's perspective, but not of DiVincenzo. I mean, I think DiVincenzo can still play a 3 at times. You can go a little bit smaller. I think he's still ideal as a 2, but you can play a little bit of smaller lineups. Okay, so you'd have Fox, Ivey, Mitchell, Davis, Holiday,
DiVincenzo.
And then what goes on with DiVincenzo, yeah. I don't know. I find a lot of trade packages I end up putting together are Richaun Holmes and Justin Holiday for matching salary. So I mean, it's just the two larger salaries outside of Harrison Barnes. So
Yeah.
like I could see a situation where Holiday's not here. I don't know, actually. Like I said, I hadn't thought about it. I guess it makes him a little bit more – you're more willing to move on from him. But I still think his skill set of just being a 3-and-D player is something that is really valuable to this team.
Sean?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm not the one that's kind of married to Donte DiVincenzo in any way. I think there are players like him that exist. And I think you can get better. I think he's just in a fortunate situation, man, where you've got restricted free agency, so he gets to go and set his market. If I'm drafting Jaden Ivey, I don't give a damn about Donte DiVincenzo in terms of whether or not he fits. Now that doesn't mean I won't go re-sign him, because if I draft him, well, then I figure it out. But the beautiful part about that is Donte DiVincenzo gets to go out and dictate what his value is.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, look, I would still consider it because I thought the pairing of Mitchell and DiVincenzo was, like, really good off the bench. I also think that when you have Richaun Holmes, and don't take this as a knock on Richaun Holmes because he's just a different type of center, but when you have him as your 5, it's really hard to run 3-guard sets. And I think when you have a passing big man like Domantas Sabonis, 3-guard sets should be like part of the calculus of this team next year. So, like, I like the idea of having a 5-guard tandem that includes Terrence Davis and Donte DiVincenzo and Mitchell and Jaden Ivey and De'Aaron Fox. I think that can be exciting. I think you can swap guys out that can do all kinds of different things. You know, again, DiVincenzo can act as a primary distributor. Terrence Davis can act as a creator. Like, I think it gives you a bunch of pieces, but I also I look at, you know, Terrence Davis is on an expiring contract, and Justin Holiday's on expiring contract. I'm not doing anything with my draft pick or even free agency because of those two players, because they're on 1-year deals, and I'm sure you can try to extend them or do whatever. I don't see that happening. So, like, again, I would keep my options open, but I kind of like the idea of like some really athletic and crazy creative 3-guard sets with this group of 5 guards, if that's where you went.
I don't disagree, but I do think they really need to address the 3. And I know it's positionless basketball, but the 3 is, I mean, 3 and stretch 4. I know we've talked about it ad nauseum, but and you have all those guards, and that's a nice problem to have. But if you don't have a true 3, I don't think you're doing yourself service for, especially when you have somebody like, you know, Sabonis and Fox, and you set yourself up nicely, but all of a sudden you look at it, you're like, man, we got some holes here. And to me, I think if you still have all those players going into next year, you're probably going to have some holes there. So I think you're just going to have an abundance of some of these guards, and I think you're going to have to make some decisions.
Hopefully Richaun Holmes is a piece that can be moved for a wing. Like, I think I'd be pretty shocked if, and you can tell me where you guys are at with this, if Holmes was on the roster at the beginning of next season. I'd be disappointed, I should say. I don't see how, like, you know, they don't have great leverage in conversations right now with the season that Holmes had last year, and the off-court things going on with him, but I don't see how you can spend like half a season just waiting for ideal value for Holmes. Like, it feels like a deal needs to be done this offseason, right? Do you think there's a scenario where they wait in the way that it felt like they did with Buddy and Bagley for an ideal
I mean,
package?
if they can't move him, that's one thing, but I think Holmes is movable pretty easily. It depends on what you want to take back, whether you're going to take back an expiring and just move off the salary, or if you're going to try to swap him out for a player that makes sense. I think that there are plenty of deals with Holmes, and like, if you leave him on the roster, you're talking about massive diminishing returns because he's not going to play. He's not going to play enough to keep his value where it is even right now. So, you know, if Sabonis is your starting center and he's playing 34 minutes a night, that leaves you 14 minutes for your backup center. And that's on nights where Sabonis isn't just dominating the action and playing 38 to 40. And so I just don't see.
And he's not a player who can really play along Sabonis either. He's
Yeah.
not that stretch. So, unless you just old school it, and because again, as you mentioned earlier, Brendan, especially if you're running the offense through Sabonis, but also Demonis he's not the best defender in the world, and neither really is Richaun, but he's certainly probably a notch above. I just don't see them doing that, especially in a Mike Brown situation. Like, that's kind of the other thing. I think you think about what Mike Brown is typically known for, and I just wouldn't see them doing something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially when you factor in Mike Brown. Mike Brown clearly would like versatile defenders like Richaun Holmes, a big man that can defend the perimeter, who can get caught in switches and hold his own. But at the same time, I just don't see that there's a way to keep both those guys on the court. I think you're just better off, like, if you can reset the center position with Sabonis, maybe Damian Jones, who again played for Mike Brown a couple of years ago in Golden State, and then Nemias Queta probably as like your third center behind the group. So I think that there's ways that you can figure this out, right? But what I don't think you should do is really base anything off of the current roster. That's for sure.
Yeah, especially with the number 4 pick.
Yeah. Says the Jaden Ivey fan club here at the Kings Beat.
I was surprised by your I know it was in talks of trading down, but your AJ Griffin shout out. Are you an AJ Griffin guy, Sean?
I think he's probably among the best shooters in the draft and nice defender. And for some reason, I don't know. I don't excuse me. I don't think he'll be a top 5 pick, obviously, but I think he could be close. I think he could fall depending upon what teams are looking for. But yeah, I do like AJ Griffin. Shocker, right? Duke guy.
Shocker.
Yeah. Actually, and like in the grand scheme of things, you have him, you have Shaedon Sharpe, and you have Ben Mathurin, which are all around the same like level or the same tier. And the more I watch, the more I like Mathurin. And I think that he should be a guy that goes, 5 or 6 as opposed to Griffin or Sharpe. Like, I would take him. I think he's a safer bet. And I keep rearranging them. I'm at like Mathurin, and then Griffin, and then Sharpe. It was switched around, but as we get more intel as we go through this process, they move around, and I think that that's the one interesting thing too about, like, Keegan Murray could go number 5, right? I wouldn't take him number 5 because I don't think that that's value at number 5 typically, but this draft is kind of shaping up where after you get done with the top 4, there are some major question marks. Like, all 3 of the guards, the Griffin, Sharpe, and Mathurin, they all have their pluses and minuses, and you can't guarantee that any of them are going to be any good at the next level. You hope that they will be, but there's no guarantee. And there are guys like Johnny Davis that could slide up because, again, I think this is it's an interesting draft, but it's not a great draft, and I think there's more value from like pick 12 to 20 than there is from pick 5 to 10. At least, like, safety wise, you're going to find that there are more players from 10. I'll say that more players from 11 to 20 that pan out than from 6 to 10. Or 5 to 10. That's just my opinion.
I like Agbaji too from Kansas.
I do too, but again, like,
It's
probably get him at 15.
Down, right,
yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
I like Tari Eason. You can get him at 15. I like Mark Williams. He doesn't work with Sabonis, but dude has a 9'9" standing reach.
I think it's interesting too. Like, if you talked about the trade down scenarios, and Charlotte's kind of farther down there, and in relation to Richaun, like, there were a lot of smoke around him and PJ Washington last year. I don't know what that looks like right around now. It's not a name we have heard a whole lot about, but trading down, that could be a team to look out for. I don't know that they're necessarily looking to get to number 4, but
I think it would take a lot. It would take a lot more than a Richaun Holmes, PJ Washington, and 13 and 15 to get to number 4.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
Like, if they want to start talking Miles Bridges to go to number 4, then that's one thing. But I don't think the Kings are I don't think Charlotte's gonna go there. But I think that the Kings can get back in at 15. I think they can use Holmes and probably get close matching up stuff and getting to 15, even if it costs them, one of their second-round picks. So PJ Washington for Richaun Holmes, and the Kings take on the 15th pick and give up the 37th pick or whatever. I think there's options there, especially with Charlotte having so many other young players that they haven't been able to fit in yet. A guy like Kai Jones, guys like Bouknight, that they can't even get to those guys yet. The last thing they need is a 13th and 15th pick in this year's draft.
Mm-hmm. They just got a little test run with Montrezl Harrell too. It was very similar style to Richaun Holmes,
but again, Holmes plays much better defense.
Yeah, no, Holmes is better. I think they just get a taste of, do we like this style of basketball with this type of center?
Yeah. I love Montrezl Harrell, but again, I don't think he fits with the Sacramento Kings at this point. But he's going to be available. He's going to be available for less than the mid-level, most likely. So you're looking at a player that's obtainable, most likely. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. All right, let's go through the business of basketball. Let's go back to the we do this every couple of weeks now, but what do you think they're going to do at number 4? And I think we need to keep monitoring this, because I think our opinions change, right? Like, what would you do if you're at number 4? Actually, let's do that. What would you do if you're at number 4? Yeah, I think that's Sean?
I think this is where we get confused a lot, because, again, I've been talking about exploring trade options, and I do, again, not knowing what you're getting. So does that mean that I'm leaning towards trade? Okay, you could call it that, but at the end of the day, if I have 4 and I don't have a trade I like, I'm drafting 4, and if I'm drafting 4, it's Jaden Ivey if he's there, if it goes the 1 through 3 as we expect.
Do you have candidates in mind that you like for trade? I know you've mentioned a couple, but
most of mine sound unrealistic at best.
Okay.
Those Donovan Mitchells, those Brandon Ingram. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that you can identify. Paul George is another one. I just don't know how you get there. I don't know how. There's plenty of guys you like in the league. Pascal Siakam is another one. How do you get there?
Yeah, fair enough.
It is.
I mean, John Collins. I mean, even though that's not necessarily. I mean, how does that? I'm still pretty big on him. I think he'd look fantastic in a Kings uniform. So
okay, so let's go there. If you had again the number 4 pick for number 16, Harrison Barnes, and Justin Holiday and some cap filler, but it took back John Collins and Herter, would you do it?
I'd think about it. I don't know. Probably not. I don't like the Herter contract very much.
It's not that bad.
It's not bad, but it's not great. And
it's a little bit more than DiVincenzo, and he's a better shooter.
He's a better shooter. It definitely addresses an area of need. I don't know. I don't know if that's worthy of the number 4, though, personally.
Okay. Brenden, what do you
tough
got for us?
For me. I still don't know how to feel about John Collins defensively, to be honest. I think that offensively he makes a lot of sense. He's a really good three-point shooter and provides more than that, too, as a pick-and-roll threat. And I think he's just a really well-rounded offensive player, finishing at the rim and all of that. Defensively, he's shown a lot of progress. I still... I don't know that I view him as the weak side rim protector and three-point shooter that I feel like some people do, and I think I need to watch a little bit more on his growth as a defender over this last season to get a better grasp on that. But I think John Collins is the name that I keep coming back to as maybe the worst player that I'd be okay with making a deal for. I still don't know that I love it, but I could see it. I see why Collins is an ideal, at least hypothetically, an ideal fit next to Sabonis, and provides the spacing that you need for a Fox-Sabonis pairing, and is still young with further upside. I get it. If I'm the Kings at 4, I'm taking Jaden. I mean, really, actually, I'm trading next year's first and moving up to Cheddar Jabari. I know I've been on this for a while, but I'm not backing down. I've watched a lot of Chet over the last couple of days. It hasn't slowed down for me.
I mean, I understand that. I fully do. If you think that Chet is going to be a defensive game changer and a guy that has offensive potential, so he's not just a one-way. We're not talking about Dikembe Mutombo. We're talking about a guy who probably, for his career can average 17 points a game, but he's not going to be a primary offensive player. Like, it's really hard not to, think about moving up, right? But I'll just tell you what I would do. If I'm at number 4, I'm probably keeping the pick and drafting whoever falls to me. And then I'm going to try to do everything in my power to go make a John Collins deal or make one of those other deals using guys like Harrison Barnes or my expiring contracts and future draft capital. That's where I would go.
That's probably the better way to say it, James, when it comes to that particular deal. I don't think it takes number 4 to get that type of deal, if that makes sense.
I think we're on the same page. I don't think it takes number 4 either. And I think you could get it done with number 4, but if I'm doing that, I probably want more.
Yeah.
From them. And the 16th pick isn't enough. So, I mean, the number 4 pick in the NBA draft, especially in a draft that's become a 4-man draft, I think it is still worthy of it. You got to take that. You got to take your shot and see if the guy pans out to be a superstar or at least a star level, all-star level player. And that's what it's going to keep coming down to. If you want to compare him to Donovan and you want to compare him to Russell Westbrook, then you can't trade him. You can't trade the 4th pick if that's who he could be. And for that matter, I think it's possible still that Ivey moves up into the top 3. And then, you may end up with one of the guys that you wanted anyways. You could end up with Chet at number 4. And people look at me like I'm crazy. No, you could definitely end up
look at
with
Brenden
Chet at
crossing
number 4.
Fingers. If you cross your fingers doubles,
what I wouldn't give.
Is that a negative? Is that bad luck if you go the double cross?
No, not for me.
Okay.
Double cross.
Did you watch Swingers yet?
No, I did not.
How dare you?
We do have some news while we've been on the pod. Nike founder Phil Knight and Dodgers co-owner Alan Smolenski have made a $2 billion plus written offer to purchase the Portland Trail Blazers. Ooh. Sources tell ESPN. Discussions are ongoing with Paul Allen Trust that's overseeing ownership of the team. Story soon. And I don't know if people are following this, but I guess it literally is like Brewster's Million. Paul Allen's wife has 18 months to sell off everything that he owned and donate it to charity. And so she's up against the clock. So that we might see something move here. And having Phil Knight involved means that the Portland Trail Blazers will stay in Portland, most likely, which is where they should be. And that's a great basketball city. I love going up to Portland. All right. Do we have any final thoughts?
Didn't Chelsea just get sold the other day, too? And wasn't there talk about Vivek being involved in that previously?
Vivek was part of one of the ownership groups that made it to the final 3. He was a minority owner in that ownership group with the British Airways guy, and they lost out. And so, no, he will not be part owner of Chelsea. But that's another situation where they're forcing him to sell Chelsea and then taking I think it's $3 billion, and giving that as reparations to Ukraine, from what I know.
Wow.
Oof. Yeah, because it's a Russian oligarch that owns Chelsea.
Lots of money.
Wow.
Billions.
So Brenden hasn't watched Swingers yet. I've been watching Anchorman this morning, which, news team assemble. Man,
Seen it, believe it or not.
It's got some great one-liners, and it is horribly inappropriate. There are many things in that
didn't age well.
That don't age well at all.
That's okay.
Yeah,
my favorite line is I forget the exact number, but it's 40% of the time it works all the time.
Paul Rudd.
Best line.
Yeah, or when Paul Rudd puts on the Panther.
The Panther.
Yeah, cologne and.
That smells like pure gasoline.
The lines that people in the office say.
Oh, yeah. Something about Bigfoot.
Yeah. There's poo with burning hair on top of it. Yeah. Anyway.
We lost James.
Some good one-liners there. Some great one-liners. Definitely lost me. Okay, so do we have any final thoughts? Sean, what do you got for us?
Final thoughts. I feel like every podcast we're going to do from here on out, we're just going to be analyzing 4 and possibilities of 4. And I kind of thought some of our opinions might change over these next few weeks, and mine really hasn't. The closer we get to the draft, so we're getting into that. We're in June now, so we're getting into the interesting phase of workouts and interviews and second appearances, any appearances at all. Some of the agencies will start doing some pretty shady stuff, and you'll hear a lot of stuff out there in the next coming few weeks that will be a little bit smoke screenish, but it all comes down to draft day. It's all that matters.
You say that. Have you heard anyone that they've worked out? Like, they've gone like radio silent for the most part, and like you.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some names, but they're not nothing. The biggest thing is I don't think they're going to be opening up any of these workouts, so that's unfortunate. But
they're not even telling us who's at them anymore.
Yeah, well, it depends on who is they.
Yeah. I mean,
but yeah, it's a fun game, man. Like chasing some of these things, hearing some of the other ones. There's some names that have all of a sudden been. Most people wouldn't have known who they were, and all of a sudden becoming factors. I think I had a tweet earlier this week about a kid from Houston. So not somebody that maybe even be drafted, but you're talking about with the ability of G League and two-way and exhibition 10s and things of that sort. Some pretty interesting names popping up, so we'll see how that goes.
All right. Brennan, final thoughts?
Keegan Murray film is really boring.
Oh, come on.
Really boring. I like Keegan Murray as a player. I think he's going to be a solid starter in the NBA for a long time. If the Kings were sitting at 5, that's probably who I would be preaching.
You're watching full games when you do this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Keegan Murray's the profile we're doing tomorrow. So I have to give myself a break of a Chet game every once in a while in between because it's just different.
Cleanse your palate with
Chet.
Chet.
There's one that's really enjoyable to watch, and then there's one that's just so boring. It's like you don't even get the slow-mo Euro steps that you get from like Harrison Barnes. It's just like, all right, I guess this is what we're doing.
A dude who's 30 years in the NBA, and you're comparing him to him. That's tough.
I'm just saying when it comes to entertainment value of watching these games, I think Keegan Murray is going to be a really good starter in the NBA for a long time. Just watching a couple of his games back to back is a little dry.
It's the stats that he finishes a game with. You don't see them. Like, you're surprised by every one of them by the time you get to the end. So, like, the fact that he averages 1.9 blocks per game, you're like, did I just miss a game where he had, like, 12 and bolstered his stat line? Like, I'm confused, So, again, like, I like him, and it's just typically he goes in, like, that player goes from, like, 12 to 18. That's when he usually goes, and I think it speaks volumes about the quality of this draft. Yeah, I think this draft is pretty shady once you get past 4. It's pretty questionable once you get past 4. Like, I don't think I like this one. I don't think I like this draft, and I don't think I like moving down. Even if it's one spot, that's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to swallow because, again, you're looking at the potential to give up an all-star to get 2 okay starters.
Just pick in the top 4, whoever's left.
Yep. Gotcha. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. We've got all kinds of stuff going on here in the next couple of weeks. We'll have more podcasts. We'll be back on Tuesday, of course, and next Thursday. We'll liven it up. It just won't be the Jaden Ivey show from here on out. We'll do some other stuff as well. We'll invent some player who's moved into the top 4 and fool all of you guys. That's kind of the name of the game. But make sure if you're watching still on YouTube, you go down below and hit the thumbs up. Give us a subscription. Jump on board with the Kings Beat. Get 15% off cool shirts like this. There's a promo code down in the description. So for Fox 40s, Sean Cunningham and Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast and, of course, the Kings Herald. I am James Ham, your Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. See you next week.